So I recently just posted a video of a terrible experience that we had on Virgin Atlantic. And in that video I explained how whilst I was on board the flight with my son who has disabilities and myself who has disabilities, effectively my son was stimming. So he had additional space and legroom and there was no one sat next to him. So he was occasionally getting up and having little movement breaks within that space. He wasn't going in anyone else's space. And also, like, occasionally he was doing vocal stims, which again weren't like at a ridiculously heightened noise. And throughout the flight I was actually having to keep prompting him to keep his voice at a lower level, because by default he actually has quite a loud voice. So for the entirety of the flight I was actually like micromanaging his behavior. He got to the point 3/4 of the way through the flight where he was very dysregulated and he started lashing out a little bit at me. I was also feeling dysregulated in that moment, due to not having any special assistance, which was pre-requested. And in that moment, I found it appropriate and the only response to elevate my voice to him momentarily for probably about 5 seconds, if that, to remind him that it's not okay to hit and that it's okay to feel what he's feeling, but he needs to find another way to cope with that, and that I was here to help him. And when I elevate my voice, I do so in an assertive way. I make my words very clear. My son has auditory processing delay, which means that oftentimes he will not be able to take in prompts. So sometimes it is absolutely necessary that I address things in that way in the moment, especially given the circumstances, because we were on a flight. So I had an unknown customer on that flight, an unknown passenger, complained multiple times to the air cabin crew about my son and the way that he presented himself as a child with special needs, because they found an issue with who he is and how he expresses himself. That was then relayed to me, and I was told to keep my child more quiet, to keep the noise down. Now, obviously, anyone who has an autistic child or a child with ADHD or similar needs will understand that it's actually impossible, and for them to go on a flight, it's incredibly hard for them. Thankfully, as somebody who is a studying motherhood practitioner, I understood the systemic issues that were at play in that moment and why I was being treated the way that I was. I understood the mechanisms which were at play. That did not prevent me from feeling distressed or humiliated, embarrassed, etc. But at least I understood what I was up against, and I decided to speak to the onboard manager to address the issue, because what I was experiencing was what a lot of people would refer to as like mum shaming or mother shame. And where that originates from is these invisible dictates that I've spoken about before, penned by Andrea O'Reilly, whereby there are certain rules that mothers must go by. And if you are a neurodivergent mother, a disabled mother, or a mother with a disabled or neurodivergent child, you simply cannot meet those rules by definition of who you are and who your child is, which is why this behavioural approach towards our children will always end up in discrimination against them. So what are those dictates? One of them is that mothers should not be seen to be mothering in public. Mothering must be kept private and in the confines of the home. So when I mothered in that moment, when I showed discipline and authority as a mother, it was instantly challenged. And also there are dictates for children. Children must be behaving in certain ways and seen and not heard. All of these rules that come from the industrial era and the Victorian era, of how children were treated. Unfortunately, behaviorism carries that through even now. So when my son presented in a way that was not neurotypical, and did not behave in a normative way, it wasn't a disruptive way, he wasn't disrupting anyone on that flight, not anyone. It was then deemed as deviant and flagged up as such. And I was then shamed, publicly shamed, in front of everybody on the aircraft. So what's important to recognise here is that the feeling of being watched, surveilled and judged that is within us, and so in turn we watch, surveil and judge ourselves, is not a made up imaginary structure. It is a social structure that exists everywhere we go, and it's so detrimental that it can actually impact freedom of movement, because a lot of us are feeling fearful, apprehensive, anxious about going anywhere, particularly on flights, especially if you're a disabled mother or a mother to a disabled child, because you are fully aware of what you're up against and that you are being surveilled everywhere you go and judged in accordance everywhere you go. And what's important is to address that and voice that for what it actually is. The blame should not sit with us, and we should shift that responsibility onto those people who are intruding and encroaching upon our personal space. So what needs to happen here is that these things need to be named, recognised and challenged in relation to the fact that as mothers, we have a fundamental right to a relationship with our child or children in absence of continuous surveillance, intrusion and interruptions of such. That relationship is personable and individual and independent for us. We as mothers, mothering and the doing of what we do as mothers should be unique to the relational aspect, because mothering is relational. It's not public. It's not for the public to demand and dictate our personal relationships. It is an individualized experience, and the only way that we can reclaim that back for ourselves is by recognizing and understanding what we are experiencing by means of social systems, and challenging and pushing back against that. How I choose to mother my child is individual and up to me. How I choose to do that. I do not expect my mothering to be interrupted in such a humiliating and public display. And that is why I challenged it, and that's why I'm publishing this now, so that others can recognize what is happening. That yes, you are being surveilled. Yes, you are being judged. Do you have to surveil and judge yourself though in turn? No, you do not. Do you have to surveil and judge others in turn? No, you do not. The only way that we can dismantle and disrupt this system that we are confined by as mothers is by challenging the status quo.